Hi there, it's Ron and Cyndi Gula with another episode of the Gula Tech Cyber Fiction Show. Cyndi, how are you?
I'm doing great, Ron. How are you doing?
Doing well. We've recorded twice in one day. We had the
Yes.
Gula Tech Cyber Fiction morning show
Yes, with coffee.
with coffee, and now we have water, and we'll be switching to bourbon and,
A little bit later.
wine later. Well, maybe not which is good. And today we are joined by Tony Cole. Tony, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thanks for making the trek out of Northern Virginia to Northern Maryland.
Happy
Well,
to be here.
We're kind of southern.
Southern? So is it
Mid.
Southern or Southern? That's all good.
Yes.
So you're here in person, but you're a master deceiver, right? You do deception for Ativo. You're the CTO. So we're going to talk about your background and a wide number of things. So how are you here today? What's your background? What's your origin story? And why should we pay attention to what you have to say in cyber? Because I do.
Well, when you flag me down on the side of the street, I've been around the block, so it's a polite way to say I'm old. But Army cyber operator, started in cryptography, built networks for the intelligence community for many years around the globe, and then got dragged kicking and screaming into cybersecurity when the Army Computer Emergency Response Team was being first stood up. It had been around for about a year, so we had some contractors running it, and I was one of the first guys into that organization. Did that for a number of years, and then built a regional computer emergency response team for the Army in Korea, and then built a Pen Cert, chartered it at the Pentagon, and after 9/11 retired, so after 20 years, and went into Silicon Valley companies, into actually the early components of deception. So joined a company called Recourse Technologies after meeting a bunch of guys from the HoneyNet project, Lance Spitzner and others that really impressed me with what they were doing with HoneyNets and honeypots, and the entire Know Your Enemy series they created got me very interested. Tried to bring those into the Pentagon, somewhat successful. So lots of lawyers in there. So not as many as DHS, but still a lot of lawyers in there. But anyway, I joined a company, Recourse, worked for them for about 6 months, and Symantec bought us and asked me to stay on after they acquired us. And I ran their program development for a number of years, chasing big programs in government, and then moved over to the consulting side and built their global government consulting. Then got lured over to McAfee after 7 years, did the same thing at McAfee, and then lured over to FireEye, so where I was their global government and critical infrastructure CTO, and wanted to go back and do a little bit more time at a startup. So when I looked around, and after all that time, almost 20 years again since I retired, I really liked where the deception space had gone to, and decided I was going to look at that space, and ended up joining Ativo Networks as a CTO.
That's excellent. And I often joke, people ask us, what do you do in cyber? And I'm like, oh, you would need a PowerPoint. But for those of us who've been in the career for more than a decade or two, it usually is government service, maybe military, maybe civilian, all the way up to I was at this startup, I was at this big company, and now I'm kind of doing this. So that's really awesome for sharing.
Thank you. It was fun.
So you said kicking and screaming. So what was the resistance originally?
Well, no one knew and really understood what they were building at that point in time. The Army Computer Emergency Response Team and the entire model was based off what Carnegie Mellon's CERT-CC was at the time. And, there was no other real organization inside Department of Defense except the AFCERT that was still very different, from what CERT-CC was doing. And the Army had a regional CERT, believe it or not, before the ACERT existed in Germany. But there was no real authority for the organization. 3 different C-suites owned it within the Army. So the J6, the G6, the G2, and the G3. So which is the CIO, the intelligence side, and the operations side. So you had a lot of hats fighting over what the mission would be. So a lot of people were hesitant to go into that field initially. And now, of course, there's Army Cybercom, and it's a completely different world, and there's career fields for it.
And nobody's competing at all for who's operating or running it or in charge.
Yeah. That's still there, obviously, for sure. Yeah, good point. But at that point in time, it was really quite a battle zone on who was going to own the mission.
So when did the C change from computer to cyber? Because it's the Computer Emergency Response Team, Computer Emergency this, and then all of a sudden we're doing cyber.
Yeah. You literally mean the letter C in all the C things changed
The
computer to cyber.
The C in Tony's name. Tony C is for cyber Cole.
I actually have a couple acronyms that use that TC Cybers and stuff. Uh, yeah, quite frankly, it's information security. That's we made that jump into cybersecurity, and I think many of us that have been around the field for a while still don't know why. It probably was not well suited to the industry, and certainly does not make us approachable. So I like the Gula concept of data care.
Absolutely.
So thanks for the tee
Okay.
up. We have to drink. That's
gotta
right.
drink.
Well, we're drinking
Drink.
water, so we'll just call it water, and we'll toasting. So
It's
as we
very
get
hot,
into
so
that's
that's
right.
a good one.
As we get into talking about data care, also thank you. You're helping us at the Gula Tech Foundation by helping us select. I don't like calling them winners, but we'll just call them grant awardees. People getting a lot done, a lot maybe more than others, and whatnot. But everybody's getting stuff done. So when we talk about cyber and the change from computer emergency, information warfare, all that kind of stuff to cyber, and then we kind of stand back and we say cybersecurity is actually not that inviting to those in the outside. That's why we came up with data care. What's your take on that? Because you've also done work in a variety of other nonprofits.
Uh, I'll tell you, it's really interesting to me. I have people that will introduce me when I'm speaking somewhere. Oh, well-known cybersecurity expert, and I kind of like cringe a little bit. Expert, really? It's a hugely broad field. I don't know if anybody. There's a few, but that are really an expert in all areas of what we call cybersecurity today. So I think it's really important for people to understand that it is an approachable field, that it is something that you can do, that it's not one very confusing, field. I mean, it's like saying somebody's a rocket scientist. Really, what part? What are you doing there? Do you work on propulsion systems? Do you work on thermodynamics? What areas do you work in? So I think changing the structure of this can be really important, and that's one of the reasons I like working with your foundation. Some of the things you're trying to drive for a change could be hugely beneficial to increasing the accessibility into this career field, where people think, oh, I could build a career because I understand here's where I am and here's where I want to get to, versus today where it's just a very large kludge of confusing and complex ideas for many people that aren't in the field today. So I really like what your foundation is doing and what others are doing in trying to build a path for people into this field, so we can help do away with this shortage of skilled cybersecurity professionals or data care professionals.
And you're also no longer, but you were an advisor for NASA.
That's correct. So
I think everybody wanted to be an astronaut at one point in their life. How do we get people to want to be a security operations center specialist, an incident response specialist? What are some ways we
Data
can
scientist.
inspire more people?
yeah, I think it's a matter of making it understandable for them, so it's something they can ascertain to in the future. I mean, when you bring up people want to be an astronaut, well, that's something that people understand. They may not think about all the different levels of expertise that you could be pilot, engineer, to be an astronaut. But on the other side of that, they understood what an astronaut does. In our field today, they don't really understand what being a cybersecurity expert is. So making it understandable and building those paths, I think could be hugely beneficial. Again, the whole data care, whichever way you want to say it, I think is critically important, because we can build those paths just like the medical field, where people know, okay, I'm a nurse practitioner and I'm happy doing this. I'm an architect and I'm happy doing this. So, I want to be a cloud surgeon, and I'm making stuff up here, of course. But the point is making
I
it
like
so
cloud surgeon. We need more of that. That sounds good.
but making it understandable so people can really know, here's where I am, here's what I need to do to get to that point in my, and have a healthy, fun career, doing this.
So you mentioned Lance Spitzner, and I recall back when we were doing Network Security Wizards, we did a lot with SANS. Lance was one of the greats, still is, and we recently interviewed Deb Ratcliffe. Deb ran the SANS. Oh, I'm going to apologize for not having it in front of me, but basically advanced. It was either the GIAC or the analyst thing. And, I got her opinion on the same thing. Data care, she likes it. We need more people in the career. But then later on, we're talking about all the stress you can have being a SOC operator, all of the maybe undermining in politics you have to deal with as a CISO. And it kind of struck me as, well, maybe we're not talking about that stuff, and that's one of the reasons people don't want to come in. So have you tried to recruit people into cyber and they said, no, I don't want to go, that doesn't seem fun?
That's a really interesting question. I've seen some reports that we're losing people, and the only people I know that we've lost are those that have been really successful and sold a company and decided to step out of the field and just take time off, uh, go into something else because they were very successful in that. But I don't know of anybody as a CISO that said, "Yeah, I'm done doing this," unless they have typically retired or moved into an adjacent area. But I don't see people leaving the field. Trying to recruit people in, I've tried a lot to recruit people in, and I've had some say that it looks too difficult, too hard, and it's not a field of study. They'd say, I'm not good at math, I don't think I want to do that. But mostly it's not no, though. It's, you start to see some excitement when they start to understand it. But you have to make it approachable, and that's the big problem today, is just people don't see it as approachable.
Yeah, there's not a lot of invitation. There's not a lot of helping understand. I had somebody to me very recently when I was trying to get her into cybersecurity. She goes, imagine being in a room of janitors. Janitors, great job. They have a great service that they provide, but I don't necessarily want to be a janitor, and everybody's telling me I want to be a janitor. And I said, well, think of it this way. If the janitors are trying to clean a wall and they just keep cleaning it and making it worse, and you come in and say, well, why don't you just paint it? That's why we need different points of view. That's why we need other people to come in and look at what we're doing and come at a different angle and come up with a different solution. And that's why when we say diversity of thought, it's really background, structure. People just think different. And we need to get everybody kind of engaged that they have a personal responsibility. Everybody has data online in one way or the other. And I would imagine you would want it to be protected either by yourself or by others. And if others have your data, that's what we're talking about, this data care. The protection of that data is ultimately cybersecurity.
I would add that I agree with you 100%. And it's 2021. The school year is winding down. We've had a major pandemic, as we all know, the largest one since 1918, and the structure of school has changed dramatically. I watch my grandkids do video after video after video at my house and my daughter's house, and why hasn't anyone taken advantage of that to also teach them the do's and don'ts of cybersecurity, starting at the very youngest ages, and one of them is in kindergarten, and all the way up through high school, doing some introductory, just overviews of different career fields on the guidance side. It's like, hey, you could be this. And you don't see that happening. And maybe it is, and maybe I'm not seeing it. But I would think that we could jump on this bandwagon very quickly and really change, the perception of young people on, oh, wow, there's a whole career field here I never even knew existed, if we took advantage of the dynamic and how it shifted over the pandemic time.
Yeah, I definitely think there's opportunity there.
Yeah, previously, we interviewed Lauren Buita, who is the founder of Girl Security. We asked her about if you could wave a magic wand and redo like K through 12 education, what would you do? And she said something at first I thought was going to be a little bit controversial. She says, you got to remove the requirement to teach STEAM. And right away, I think you could see Cindy and I kind of lean back on, what do you mean? But she said, look, what kids need going forward is like critical thinking skills, ethics skills, being aware of I don't want
digital citizenship.
Digital citizenship. That I don't want to put more words, but I'm like, yeah, that's spot on. And we talk about how there's not enough cybersecurity trainers out there. There's not enough math teachers out there. And I'm not saying, like that's the problem why the schools aren't getting it done. But I thought it was a really interesting point.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I've been a big advocate of the cyber do's and don'ts. The ISC squared Garfield series, my grandkids have, all of those. And, the youngest one we've read to, but, the one in third grade, he's read all of those himself. And I think it's critically important, and we need to do more in that area so they do understand what's right and what's wrong, online. Instead, we talk about cases in high school for cyberbullying. Why aren't we doing things at a much younger age so they know what you should and shouldn't do? You don't let your kid stand at a playground, and throw rocks at other kids, right? So, but yet online, it seems to be okay for some reason in many situations, and it's not.
I'm not familiar with the Garfield cyber thing. What can you give us an example cartoon on the
Sure,
spot?
it's well the Garfield author and illustrator did a deal with ISC Squared for the Center for Internet Security, and has created a whole series of Garfield cartoons, which are really cool about cybersecurity. So it's Garfield talking to kids about
How did I not know
cybersecurity.
this?
Yeah,
I
we
love
have
Garfield.
no
I still have a
idea.
Garfield blanket from when I was a kid, so I love Garfield.
I think that they're going to be getting an order for that from the Gula Tech
Yes, I
Advantage here
definitely think
pretty
so.
soon.
I am cybersafe.org.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And it's funny because, we're engineers and we know that the industry takes themselves too seriously sometimes. So hopefully there's a joke in there like, are you safe at maybe 600 of the 700 CIS controls, or do you need all 700 of those, right? And only insiders would get,
Yeah.
that's funny. I guess if I have to tell
I
you,
know.
it's not that,
Well,
not that
it's
funny.
some of our audience is not that, so tell them why it's funny.
Well, because it's really hard to write down what it means to be secure. Once you write it all down, it becomes really boring, and it's hard to incentivize people to actually do it. Any other comments on that?
No, I agree with you on that. It's very hard. And, today, with all the ransomware cases taking place, you're starting to see, from what I've read, the insurance industry going, ooh, what is real due diligence in this area when you got a determined adversary that wants to monetize your data? So, and, how many controls do you need to stop them?
So a control could be deception.
Yes.
So a TiVo, Mantrap, that was the original product was Mantrap that came from which company?
Recourse
Recourse
Technologies.
Technologies. I
Yeah.
forgot that on the spot. But now you're with a TiVo.
Okay.
So what do you do at a TiVo? What is deception? And how does it stop something like a Colonial pipeline from happening?
Yeah, it's a great question. We do a lot of different things. Deception is really where the company got its start, and we've spread out from there, adding other components into our deceptive portfolio. The biggest way to explain it in a very quick fashion is we shrink dwell time. That time from when an adversary breaks into a system before they're detected. And we do that through a number of different things, adding decoys into an environment, adding breadcrumbs and lures into the operational environment that lead an adversary into the decoys. A great example when you talked about the Colonial Pipeline attack, Active Directory was using that. We place on the endpoint our AD secure technology, part of our endpoint detection net. And that software very simply looks for queries to Active Directory. And for those listeners that may not be very technical, it's like the GPS inside 90% of the world's enterprises, and 90% of those implementations are used by attackers. So when an attacker compromises a system through a phishing email or a waterhole attack, the standard attacks that take place today, one of the first things they do is they use some tools to scrape memory and then to go and look at Active Directory. They do a query to it to see, all right, where do I want to go? Where are the assets I want to steal? And what we do is we intercept those results at the endpoint and provide deceptive information back to the adversary. So now they can't find, who are the domain administrators. We hide the shares so they can't see the real shares, so they can't encrypt those, so it would stop the ransomware in its tracks. And then an additional piece is our AD assessor that goes through continuously once a week and assesses Active Directory, looking for vulnerabilities, looking for attack paths, and helping clean all of that up before an adversary hits it.
So let's back that up a little bit, because a lot of people who watch this and aren't from cyber, they kind of think as having malware, having malicious code on their computers as binary thing. I'm infected or I'm not infected. But in the cases of like SolarWinds, the CEO said, look, the Russians were in their network years before they did anything. And then with ransomware, even with Colonial Pipeline, even though we don't have all the details yet, what's the time between phishing and then the actual infection? Talk more about that dwell time. Because a lot of people don't realize that they could have dwell points on their network right now, or footholds even, and they're a week away or a day away of having ransomware. So how do you guys look at that?
That's a great point you're making, and quite frankly, there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of those that are happening right now that we're simply unaware of. And it goes back to SolarWinds, a great example. The biggest hack we've ever seen, And my response always is that we know of, because it may be happening we're simply unaware of. So when you look at dwell time across the board, you really have to think about a number of different things. The adversary, first of all, is typically done reconnaissance on your organization. The Microsoft Exchange attack, Hafnium, that took place after SolarWinds, supposedly when those vulnerabilities came out, it was a matter of minutes before there were attackers scanning out there looking for opportunities to compromise somebody, versus a targeted attack where they're specifically looking at your organization, your corporation, or potentially even a high wealth individual, doing reconnaissance on them from social media. LinkedIn is a gold mine for pulling that information up. Doing the compromise is somewhat rudimentary because it's pretty easy. I've been in this field forever, and I will tell you, and I know you both know this, doesn't matter, I could get compromised as well. So if I'm sitting there and I subscribe to a news flash every single day, and somebody knows that I subscribe to that news flash, and I got a grandkid in daycare down the street or something, and they spoof that email and send it over to me, do you think I'm going to click that link if they say there's a fire there? Yeah, I'm a human being. More than likely I'm going to. Hopefully my spidey sense will go off, and I'll do some research, and I'll go to the website instead of clicking the link. But nevertheless, everybody can be compromised. But the point is, from that initial point of compromise, that dwell time, even though it shrunk because of ransomware cases, can sometimes run for years. The Yahoo breach was one that ran for years and years, and still they don't talk about it anymore. Don't know if it's really cleaned up or not. So you've got to look at the dwell time from that initial point of compromise until it's detected. That's the dwell time. But then you have the containment time after that could run for a long period of time. And you also have the pivot time. How long does it take that adversary to leave that initial breach point and move laterally inside the environment, escalate their privileges? That's kind of where our expertise is, looking for that lateral movement and the privilege escalation, and the additional beachheads they may create. So many companies today talk about, oh, well, we caught them at this point, we cleaned it up, and they're out. Well, are they? Are they out? Do you know if it's a sophisticated adversary? Maybe they put in additional beachheads and they went dormant for a year. You don't know.
I think that's something else that the public doesn't quite understand when they think, oh, a security hack. Like when a kinetic bomb hits, it's instant, you see it, it's there, and that was the point of attack. Yes, they can understand there was planning to get to it and everything, but in general, the attack itself is kinetic. And we still borrow a lot of the language from kinetic attack to cyber, but the reality is
Implant, rootkit.
Yeah.
there is so much more time-based initiatives that people can hide, and the cat and mouse is we are learning from them every time you detect something new, to then be able to parrot and pretend to be them on the other side so that you can get the activity that you want. Again, I don't think the public really has a great understanding of when we say the Colonial Pipeline was attacked. That one was a little bit of a shorter period, but there was probably reconnaissance and there was a lot of things laid down before that. But SolarWinds, Yahoo, talk a little bit more about the dwell time and what you can learn in the dwell time, and then when you use some of these tools and you exploit the tool that you want, why do you only do it once sometimes? Why is that, what is the secret sauce there?
Yeah, you bring up some really interesting points. And the first thing I'll say is we do that because the only time that hacking is really exciting is if you're on the receiving end and you detect it and suddenly it's a flurry of activity. So before that, all the preparation for an attack taking place is very boring and very tedious and a tremendous amount of work. It's only exciting when it's in a movie or on TV. So that's not the real life.
And Matt Damon's on the keyboard.
Yeah, Matt Damon's on the keyboard. And, because it's a tremendous amount of work. And there's a lot of reconnaissance that goes into those attacks, where more often than not, if you're targeted, there's a lot of reconnaissance. Sometimes it is, something like there's a new vulnerability and they're looking for targets of opportunity because they're vulnerable. When you look at the Colonial Pipeline and exploits, that one to me is very interesting because most attackers don't want to burn an exploit. They've got something that's interesting, unique, and they may have spent a lot of money and time creating that exploit for a vulnerability. It might be related to a 0-day, and they don't want to burn it. So, which means that they're going to use it, and they know when they use it, sooner or later someone's going to capture it, disassemble it, and then understand what it does. So what they would prefer to do instead is find an existing vulnerability in your system that you've never patched. We were talking about Lance Spitzner, and he's now doing the security awareness piece, and that's one of the reasons that field is so important and so critical today, because what we need to do is patch many of our users by upgrading their knowledge so they understand what a phishing email looks like.
If it was only that easy.
Yeah, if it was only that easy. Well,
Automatic.
And we've all been through that. I mean, if your CEO has never asked you, to go and buy gift cards suddenly, why would they? When by the way, it's coming from a new email address, or they send you an email with a link in it, totally unexpected. So I think that's really important, so people start to understand. And I like to say, pinch of paranoia can help keep you safe all the time when you're online, and it really can. But they don't want to burn those exploits, so they use vulnerabilities when they can, and then save that for a very difficult task that they may have. When you look at what happened on the Colonial Pipeline, that could have been much, much worse than it was. We're lucky at this point in time, and I really hope that I'm not saying this again in 5 or 10 years, but it's likely, that people really take this wake-up call this time.
Here's a nickel.
Yeah, seriously, if we were doing shots, I'd have to drink, probably 5 for that one. But take it seriously this time, because if it had been an adversary, a nation state, a rogue nation state that wanted to do damage, it could have tremendous impact versus the impact it had just simply on gas prices and a lack of fuel, on the U.S. East Coast for a hacker group that was trying to monetize an attack, through ransomware on Colonial Pipeline. So I think that's problematic, and people don't realize that correlation between the two. If that had been a rogue nation state, it could have been much worse. And we've all talked about worst case scenarios, dead of winter, and they do this, and they take out propane lines, and they take out the utility grid, in Northeast or Upper Midwest.
Or Texas, even if there's a snowstorm,
Texas,
right?
Yeah.
So a lot of what we're talking about is enterprise security. This type of deception is not from my phone. It's not from my computer. You're in the large enterprise. And I think for people who don't live in that space, they have a hard time, like, well, how couldn't Colonial Pipeline, find this out? Or why did it take so long for SolarWinds to do that? So 2 questions. So one is, does deception, does it allow for quicker detection of malware? Let's just start with that, of these implants. Does it allow for quicker detection than, say, a CrowdStrike or a McAfee or a Fire? And I'm not saying like you're better or worse. Is it faster to detect these malwares?
It is faster because it's different. And there was I'm trying to remember, the article came out yesterday. It's very interesting. It talked about how often Active Directory is used in breaches out there. Many of the attackers today are living off the land. They take those initial credentials, and then they're very quietly moving through the network. And EDR is not alarming.
There's no exploit.
Yeah, there's no exploit.
I hacked Tony Cole, and now I'm walking around the network as Tony Cole.
Yep, exactly. And then when you're in the logical realm, people don't know what I look like, so they're following all the normal rules that I do, going through there. So, and until they find better credentials, and then they're pretending to be that person. So to me, that's problematic, and we're very good at detecting that activity much more quickly than most of the EDR solutions out there. And we've built some really, really good analysis based on MITRE ATT&CK's testing of EDR, compiled our own testing, and then did a white paper on that Ed Amoroso wrote for us that I think people would find very interesting.
Tag Cyber,
yeah. By the way, on that, a lot of people look at what we do. We have like 6 of the Fortune 10 as customers today, but we have a lot of the high end of the SMB, the small, medium businesses are customers as well.
So the second, if I may, the second technical question is, well, you might have had a technical question, right?
Go ahead.
So when you're in a SOC, And we talked about the misery that a lot of SOC operators go through because, the N in NIDS, network IDS, is really for annoying. That's a bad joke.
never ending
There's a lot of
alerts.
noise,
Yeah.
right, that come from your SIMs, your anomaly detector, your threat correlation engine. There's a lot of noise. So if you're in the SOC, every day you get noise and you have rules and triage and it's more rules and okay, this one got through level 1 goes to level 3. My understanding of applications like Ativo is that when they have a signal, it's a signal. So how do you train an organization to believe those signals? How do you get them to pay attention to one? Like I only got one alert from Ativo today, but I got 1,000 alerts from my sandbox. How do you let them prioritize?
Especially knowing that they have to be 100% right.
Yeah, it's not easy because so many security teams today are just overwhelmed by all the vendors coming at them. And to make it a little bit more problematic, most security teams that are using deception don't talk about it. And it's just kind of funny because test after test has shown it doesn't matter if you know about it or not, you're still not getting around it. And not that the solution is perfect, no solution is perfect. But what's interesting is we don't alert that much, exactly as you stated, and that's kind of a challenge sometimes when you're trying to get a team trained up, because sometimes they want to take your technology, oh no, we got your guide, we're going to do the proof of concept ourselves and we'll get back to you. And they'll get back to you and they're like, oh, you guys hardly light up at all. Well, what test did you run against it? And by the way, that is, one of our goals is to give you less alerts, and it's high fidelity alerts. When you see them, it's all hands on deck. So we do, try to really push that whole concept right up front with them. That when you see these, and we do introductions to many of their counterparts, that have been using our technology for a while, and let them listen to them. It's like, oh no, when you get an Ativo alert, all hands on deck, those are high fidelity, and you better take action because you're popped. Because they're assets nobody should be touching.
Yeah, it's funny because I usually do a lot of introductions for one of our portfolio companies, Scythe, to red teams so they can do it. But more and more I've been introducing them to security vendors so they can show customers how their tool works in a repeatable kind of fashion and that sort of thing. So
Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially in your position and where we were, lived through the series of not knowing
Yeah.
and not having any vision. And so, from the 90s on, we were trying to expose more people to the vision and to the alerts, and now we're in alert overload. So I think mindset wise, telling people, no, you should have less alerts is really going to be a dynamic shift. And to that, some people are not necessarily on the deceptive bandwagon as a mode of protection. So, I mean, what have you seen as a shift either from the enterprise accepting deception as the higher fidelity that they need because of all the noise? I mean, do you see that coming sooner, later, ebbing, flowing?
I think we're really in the midst of it now, where people are really that have utilized it and that are listening to MITRE talk about it. Dr. Stan Barr, MITRE Shield, the Yang side of MITRE Attack, MITRE Shield, the yin and yang fit together, the attacker TTPs versus building the defensive mechanism. So people are starting to really listen. And NIST has been pushing Dr. Ron Ross on resilience really hard on this, and it's now part of the cybersecurity framework. Misdirection and decoys are because of the high fidelity alerts, and it's called out in many of their special publications. So I think it's changed. And I think anytime somebody brings this up, I kind of have to look at the camera and say, I'm sorry, because I was one of those people where we didn't have near enough alerting and stood on stage way too often saying, you should log everything. And now, of course, we're paying that price from many of us doing this around the globe. All the alerts, and there are analysts pulling their hair out every day.
I call it yet another thing. Yet another thing to look at, yet another thing to listen to, and yet another thing to see. But again, I mean, everybody's innovating, coming up with new technology, new ways to approach the problem, and analyzing the new attacks that are out there to then turn and use them against them. So, the field is so exciting in that aspect, but to your point, it could be very draining keeping up on everything.
And you mentioned Ron Ross. I think he's spot on saying there is no security engineering anywhere in the cyberspace solarium. So I've always described cybersecurity as you have to have hygiene, and you have to have hunting. How much is kind of up to you, but you're pretty much on your own unless you design something securely. And I'm fearful that a lot of what we're pushing as an industry is just more hygiene and more hunting. More, that's better. It might not stop the next colonial pipeline unless you've designed it from the ground up to
Yeah.
be secure.
I agree, and unfortunately, it's going to continue that way because capitalism and quite often first to market wins versus best engineered, best designed, and that's the world we live in, and we've got to change that mindset around coding.
Which
Right,
is
but it's best engineered, best design, best price. But the reality is, deception might be the washing of hands for dropping infection rates. For we don't know. Is that the least amount of calories you can spend to increase, the cost on your adversaries? Are doing things like, I mean, we didn't talk about Ativo's ability to kind of put the honey tokens, in documents, but that's another kind of thing. If people are scared, people watermark everything. I mean, I know digital rights management, DRM is a bad word for a lot of people, but if you could put a little tracker in every document and see when it leaves and goes to a third party or your adversaries, why isn't that a bad thing? So what do you guys do in that area?
We do honey docs for sure, and we've got it set up. We're having a conversation today, and whoa, in some of our countries that we operate in, that we could be violating laws. Not really, because quite frankly, you can set it up so it's only going to alert you if it's open in the enterprise, or you can say it only alerts you if it's open outside the enterprise, or you can do both, or you can do neither. You don't have to turn that on at all. So, but I do think that's an important, piece to have, for enterprises out there because so many documents are stolen. We just saw the case on the FBI agent that stole a ton of stuff for many, many years. It just came out, I think it was last week. When insider threats we know are down, but nevertheless, insider threats can also be the most impactful.
You have a list of every insider event? No.
No. And I'm sure there are many going on we're unaware of.
Yeah, we all went home and we all worked remotely, and insider threats went down.
yeah,
I
they
don't
just
believe
went
that.
away. It's
I don't
just a
believe that for
magic.
bit. A report that did just come out, though, I don't know if you saw the latest Verizon breach. I mean, they come out every year. Very good report, usually on for the most part. They talked this time that the main things they were pushing were asset management. You can't defend what you don't know.
Yeah.
So my question is, because I started with honeypots, we were basically just adding targets onto the network and waiting. It was very unsophisticated in the mid 90s and whatnot. But so how does a TiVo interact with IT? Does it create any more work for them? Does it, are they already over busy? Like, is it a problem? Because that's one of the stigmas of honeypots. Like, you shouldn't do this because you could get compromised. You're going to create work for IT. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's not any more work. We've got some large enterprises that dedicate half a man year to it. We have some large enterprises that have dedicated quite a bit more staff, and I think it jumps back to what are you trying to get out of the deployment that you have? Are you looking for those high fidelity alerts for detection, and that's just built into your into your SIM solution and your SOC processes that you have, so there's no extra weight on your team, just better alerts that tell you all hands on deck because you are compromised? Or are you studying the adversary TTPs and you want to pivot them into decoys, and you've integrated your own golden images, those systems that you already have, and actually are creating deception campaigns where here's some new research we're doing, but in reality it's a decoy environment. Are you stepping outside of that environment even and adding some information on engineers you've created into LinkedIn, into other places? So are you doing a full campaign around deception, or is it specific for those detection components for the high fidelity alerts? So it really can be very light, and we have some small organizations that do that, and we've got some that have dedicated a lot of resources because they see great value out of studying what the adversary is doing, and they want to pivot them into those decoys. And not, I don't say play with them, because they're not playing with them, they're monitoring them, they're watching them, so and looking to see what they're doing so they can understand TTPs better.
So in general, you had made a couple of comments specifically about customers that are using deception, and I could say it about the entire industry, is that we don't talk about what we do an awful lot. So in that case, I mean, do you see a world where there's going to be more sharing of that adversary activity in a quieter way or in a more useful way to protect each other in a more global sense. Companies that would normally be competitors would certainly be frenemies when it comes to attacks and national security and other things that could potentially ultimately kill people. If we haven't got there yet, we may see that in the future.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point, and I think it's use a cricket term, it's a sticky wicket. So I don't really even know what that one means, but I'm not a cricket fan. But nevertheless, I think it's a challenge. I think it's really important to share information. I think more adversary TTPs. I love what MITRE has done with MITRE ATT&CK, but sometimes you can share too much information, and trying to limit that can be very, very difficult. When you look at some of my personal experiences working with multinationals about an attack that took place, and you would have a customer that knew an attack took place and they have information on it and they wanted to share it, and before it could go to a financial institution in the same city outside the United States, it would have to go back to their headquarters, so in New York, and then come all the way back, so for approvals for them to share it across the street. So with somebody that they, were neighbors with or friends with, but nevertheless, the culture does not allow for sharing in some countries. So that's a problem. And then you also have many countries where you've got expertise that, is aligned with government. So that may be sharing with that government, that may be frenemies, with the U.S. and some of their allies. So there's a lot of gray area in there, and it can be problematic. You see a lot of defenders today that get very upset at other defenders because they think they're sharing too much, and they're helping an adversary potentially understand detection technologies. So it's really a gray area, and I think it's going to be problematic for quite a while. Sharing is good, but the structure for it has to be well defined, and I think we're not at that point yet.
You mentioned that some countries where you're deploying a TiVo, there's laws, policies on privacy that prevent you from collecting this sort of stuff. You also mentioned that Ron Ross is pushing for honeypots and deception, as part of the engineering. So where is public policy on deception? If I'm going to give a document that's infected to a potential hostile adversary, do you need letters of marque, mark, whatever? I've heard it said both ways. Where is that as far as in the public discussion?
Yeah, I don't think that's being discussed much in the public light at this point in time. We're not involved or engaged in those conversations at all. We instead are huge proponents of active defense. So really having home field advantage. So slowing the adversary, just as NIST talks about slowing the adversary, feeding them misinformation, but doing it all inside your own enterprise. We give you the ability, if any of your data is stolen, to understand where that data is accessed, if you wish to have that, if you wish to turn on that functionality. But we in no way advocate, for any company to do hacking back, to reach back out and hit a hacker in the face by, breaking into their computer.
So I'm Iran. I hack one of your customers. I take one of your documents with the honey token tracking. I try to open up in my lab. I see it reaching back out to America, and I go, oh my God, that's Cyber Command. Like, that's what the politicians talk about. They want to construe 2 or 3 different things. And I kind of think that's far-fetched, but folks outside of our industry call that could be a potential hackback. Now, of course, people who are doing this are like, yeah, of course that happens every day. Every PDF you open reaches back out to America one way or another. What are your thoughts on that?
It goes to Loudoun County through that.
That's right. That's right.
The myriad of data centers there. Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, and we know already it's happening, government to government, around the globe. I really don't know at this point in time how many countries have a sophisticated capability in this area. So I know when I used to monitor this, it was over 55, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's not well over 100, 120 even. So I think it's probably going on already. When we look at espionage, physical espionage, and how it happened for, quite frankly, many millennia, and then we built the internet and connected everything. This is a cheap, easy way, to compete with a bigger power that you couldn't compete with before. And previously, if you wanted to play in that space and steal national secrets or intellectual property to give your own country a leg up, in the competition, you needed to train spies, you needed to bring them in country, or place them here, or turn people to become spies for you. But doing it in the cyber realm, you don't have to have the expertise. You need money, and you can go rent the expertise. So I think all of this is happening already, and quite frankly, we see just probably a tiny smidge of all the activity out there on documents being opened that were stolen, and by stolen I mean purposely leaked, put into place, and the avenue was created to allow somebody to steal it simply so they could understand if that really was a target or not.
And then if you think of the spectrum of like nation state hacking all the way down to someone's going to dox somebody because they're famous or they're an ex-girlfriend and you dislike them on Twitter, having those honey tokens, the ability to do that can let you see that. But what I think is interesting is we talk about this hackback as like this evil thing. I mean, the reality is if you're a big bank and you see a bunch of your documents leaking, I'm just going to pick a country, South Africa. You probably can call up people in South Africa in law enforcement and be like, look, here's what we have. You might be tracking a hacking group. Maybe this is 2 and 2 you can put together, and it's a legal way to go back. I've seen some people say, well, no, you can't do that either. That's hacking back. That could be a nation state. And we can't have Citibank go against a nation state. And I'm like, man, as long as you're engaging another country, I think that's fine.
Yeah, and companies are going up against nation states all the time.
Every day.
Every day. People don't realize it, in that are outside our field, but it's happening every single day. You have Chinese actors that are trying to steal intellectual property to drive their national strategy to give them an economic advantage without paying for all the research that went into it. And that's happening not just against the U.S. that we hear here locally, but around the globe. So yeah, I agree with you on that. If something like that happens to you and we have the relationship with law enforcement, why not? Why wouldn't you pick up that phone and call them and get your corporate counsel involved and maybe the Department of Justice as well, and Department of State, and try to drive it forward.
I think some of the comfort I think we would need is to make sure that the law enforcement is at the sophistication of understanding what is even being said. I mean, the internet has grown so fast, the innovation goes so quickly. It's interesting that now this is a law enforcement thing when we expect law enforcement to train at the academies very physically, it's a very physical containment process or one-on-one or very structured. I jokingly say the WWW stands for Wild Wild West right now. So relying on the government to get this correct, to protect not only the government but the companies and the individuals, I think that's a pretty large thing to do if we're not capturing the imagination of the public to jump in and help.
I would agree with you on that. If we don't start changing the level of understanding for the public, then we're never going to be successful. And we have so many examples of where people are just naturally trained in physical security, that it's automatic, that we don't have challenges with it. And we've never tried to do it, in the online realm. An example, take any store, any mall, any school, any church, and, there's a sign there on a door that says, "Do not push, door will alarm." People turn around and they walk around and find another door to leave, right? So, that's an area that people just sort of naturally understand, and they understand physical security, don't chain doors shut at a school, right? People understand these things. But on the other side of that, we've never done anything in the online community, just simple do's and don'ts to train people and build that level of understanding across the board. I had somebody asked me once on a panel, it's like, what's your proudest accomplishment in this field? I said, seeing my mom post on Facebook, something somebody else had shared in the family. And she said, oh, no, don't share that. I looked it up on Snopes.com. And she's in her 80s, she's like, that's not real. So, but that's the whole point is we can train anybody up in this if we take the time, level of effort, and provide that. The lower age we start, the more knowledgeable public we'll have in 20 years.
And it really does take a level of trust and local. I mean, it is very local. It's person to person. The government, in my opinion, has a huge thing to do to protect the country. And when they're trying to do some education pieces, they're missing the mark because of the language that they're using. They're not being very inviting into, you have something, a role to play in this as well. It's kind of like seatbelts. When seatbelts,
Yeah.
or when cars came out, people got a car and they drove it into a tree, and they were killing themselves. And they're like, well, gee, can we do something about this to make it more secure? And they're like, yeah, well, you can pay extra to have this seatbelt in. Well, then they put the seatbelt in, and then the government came in and said, no, 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 it's not an extra feature to have security. Seatbelts are a requirement. And then what did the car companies do? They started competing. They started driving their own cars into the wall and then putting airbags in. And then the government and the insurance company says, you can drive a car that only has 1 star, but the insurance company says, we'll charge you less if you have 5 stars. And then people were like, well, now would I put my 18-year-old son or daughter in a 1-star car that I know is safe versus the other? And I just think as an industry, that whole DevSecOps, the idea that it's not secure by making it, if you require me to download an app to bank or to do government interaction, to vote, to do anything, then why is it not required to be secure? And I think if we get this data care initiative where people understand, hey, if I give you my data, I have an expectation of privacy and protection, I think we'll get there with, it needs to be secure by design. And so with respect to the government, I mean, there's been a new shift at CISA. There's, new leadership. Like, what do you think of what the government has done to date? What do you think the Biden administration, with the push there, the initiatives, how do you, the cyber moonshot, like, how do you see us getting more to the public and advancing this industry?
I thought you were going to ask him to pass a law that honeypots had to be in every network.
I'm sure he'd be for it, right?
Well, you bring up some really interesting points, and I think first and foremost, I've seen some changes that give me some hope, that we're moving down the right path. When you look at GDPR, in the EU, General Data Protection Regulation, I think is the acronym. Saying GDPR so long it's hard to remember what the acronym is anymore. But when you look at that privacy law that took place in the EU, and you look at the privacy law in California, and you look at the privacy law that just went into effect this year in Virginia, the one in Virginia is somewhat rudimentary, but nevertheless it's about protecting consumers, like the California law, which I think is really important. So it gives me some idea of hope down the line. The county I just moved out of, Loudoun County in Virginia, I was ecstatic a couple of years ago. I've got their daily police report, and we just look at it and they send it out to any citizen that wants to subscribe. A couple of years ago, they started at the bottom and they would list all the scams out that were taking place, and here are the scams, don't fall for this. And it was a PSA, so that was just at the bottom of their police report. And I started, just cutting that out and dropping it into Facebook like 3 or 4 times, a week, for people to read and look at, and other relatives, and hopefully others, share. Because you read that police report and you're like, seriously, the IRS had you buy gift cards from, the Google Play Store? Really? Do you really think that was the IRS? So, but again, we're not educating on that side. So I think, what has the government done? They've done some good things, but we still haven't seen it at the federal level to do anything to help consumers. I hope that's coming. I hope we have some privacy laws that start to force companies to think about accountability, that have, we've entrusted our data to them. I hope that we start to do more. iOS 14.5 is out. Google is starting to do some things with Android now. And by that I mean, now, you've got some privacy options inside the operating system, so you can start to tail back, what information is shared with some of these applications. I think that's a good thing. I'd like to see that tied in with what the government's doing and PSAs on, making the citizens more aware, even as we also work to educate them. At a federal level, I think that we have a long way to go. I do like Biden's EO, that executive order that just came out. I think there was some good points in there, but I think there's a lot of stuff that's left out of it as well that needs to be focused on. And I know there's a lot of potential pending legislation, that is sitting at Congress that may or may not make it, onto the House floor and the Senate floor, for votes, that could change a lot of things around the privacy side and putting proper expectations on large companies that are touching our data.
there's been a lot of positive movement. So you got the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, you got the Cyber Moonshot, you got the recent executive order, and it seems like every day there's progress, and nobody wants to criticize it because I think everybody in the industry wants to spend more money for whatever social cyber project or vendors and whatnot. My big ask, and we touched on this already, was the engineering. But what we really need is more cyber fiction at the movie theater.
Yeah.
So what can we do to get like a Top Gun for cybersecurity that could want people to go into this industry, glamorize it, make it really interesting, make it relevant for defending the country? What are your thoughts there?
Well, unfortunately, I'm going to take a downer on that. Realistic, so that when people get into the industry, they're not saying it's nothing like I expected, it's nothing like on TV, because that's what we say, but that's still everybody's expectation. But what could we do to actually, I guess, excite people?
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point. And in the DC area, we've seen some interesting commercials from some of the large integrators that I've looked at and just thought, it's like, why hasn't government picked one of those up and turned it into a PSA? When you look at what the Army did, trying to pull people in, I'm trying to remember the game. There's a video game,
or you're pretending to be something
a
else?
sniper. So
A sniper game.
yeah,
Okay.
it's a sniper game, but it was really interesting because at the time when this thing was created, it was a very popular game, for the PlayStation and for the Xbox, and the shows two kids, that's just getting killed repeatedly in this game, and it shows some special forces troops. So in a tent near the end of the commercial, it's like shooting ducks in a barrel. They're sitting there, on their remote, sitting in a tent in the middle of nowhere, wiping out these young kids. So, but the point is, it was very interesting, and it generated tremendous amount of interest for special forces in the military. And there was so much that we could do in this space, doing the same thing to generate interest through PSAs to pull people into the data care industry if we actually take the time to do it. Northrop Grumman has one of the commercials I was thinking about that's very, very interesting, very good, trying to get people to go into cybersecurity. It shows security of some of their fighter jets they create and many other things that, that company focuses on. But why haven't we done any of that from the government side? And I go back to, when I was a kid, and you probably both, know it too, conjunction, junction, what's your function? I'm a bill laying there on the house steps, right? And they had all of these PSAs that just are ingrained in my brain, decades and decades later. And we could do this and get people interested in this industry if the government would step up and make an effort there. That's not that expensive for them.
So all I could think of was password. Don't use just passwords. Like that's the only thing I could come up with.
No default passwords.
One of the winners of our last foundation was Theorem Media. We had 4 runners up, and Theorem Media, they got a lot of really interesting people helping them out. But they're trying to come up with those PSA quick, hard hitting videos. So I'm pretty encouraged about that. I was pretty excited for them to get in there.
Yeah, a lot of times when people say workforce development from the government, they think for the government. And I like to remind them, most people in cyber don't work for the government.
Yeah.
We work for national defense and national security because that's part of our commercial onus as well. But it's not for the government. And I really think that we need the government to understand that that's bigger than just coding or hacking or anything else. We need ethics. We need to have the conversations about the Geneva Convention for the internet. We need to have laws, international laws. We need to have the communication language. I mean, privacy doesn't mean the same thing in every country. So, I mean, even understanding how and what we do in this World Wide Web of the Wild Wild West, I really think we're a little behind.
Are you a book reader? Have you read the latest books and whatnot?
It's been a while, unfortunately.
So
There's a stack of new ones at my house, but
So I just finished Ghost Fleet, and I really like that. That's a bit, we'll say it's a bit dated 'cause it's out. I thought it was very relevant because it had a lot of future space warfare, cyber warfare, some sensational stuff, pretty good. But I wanted to read that before I read 2034, which is the book everybody's reading and whatnot.
That one's on my list.
Yeah, and then the next one on my list is Mobius from Richard Thiem, which apparently he just wrote as a composite of intelligence community people. Apparently there's a bit of cyber in it and whatnot. But I've often found the book novels do a better job talking about cybersecurity because they set up, if there's a scene of like a Chinese hacker, getting ready to turn off power in a city, you can talk in a novel format about how the implants have been there, how they've managed them over the years, how this was a national apparatus of China. And I'm thinking, yeah, it's kind of like what we do that, but it's a great way to kind of.
Over in a movie, I don't think would really get the same.
No, you can't. But it's the same way, like when Tom Clancy started, and nobody knew the difference between, low-level nap of the earth fighter bomber stuff, or how anti-radiation harpoon missile kind of worked. And you have two or three paragraphs in there, and you make it part of the story. I've often liked that, but print is dead, right?
Well, still books on tape.
And
right?
it doesn't translate near as well when you put it on the big screen. It just does not.
It doesn't. It doesn't. So what are some other things you're involved in besides Ativo?
Well, your foundation, thank you both very much for that. I thoroughly enjoy that. I love seeing you, work diligently to give back to the community. And I think that's fantastic. I'm also on a board for TDI Security, a startup. I shouldn't say startup. They've been around for over a decade. A boutique cybersecurity firm in DC, TDI Security. I'm on Bayshore Networks Advisory Board, and just slowing down a little bit after leaving NASA and their advisory council, and also ISC Squared's board of directors.
It's worth noting that I think once you go on a board, once you start a company, once you're a CEO, you need to actually understand what you want to achieve. And it's okay to be like, hey, I've done that, right? So you've given back. You've done ISC Squared, you're the NASA board, but you've also are still doing the children's, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just blanked on it. Children's Hospital?
White Hat USA Gala.
Yes, but it benefits the Children's Hospital?
And the pandemic slowed everything down simply because pandemic. So the big gala was out. I suspect we'll probably be back next year, not this year because it takes a full year of planning for that event. But yes, a charity benefiting Children's National Medical Center.
That's what I was trying to forget.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, Children's National is a great hospital in the DC area that helps children that need surgery regardless of whether they can pay or not. They don't care. So they really have done some wonderful things, and it's quite frankly it's hard to bump into a family that doesn't have at least a friend that had somebody at Children's National that got help there.
So we're recording this middle of May. COVID's over.
2021.
Right? 2021. Are you going to go to Black Hat or DEF CON?
I have not decided yet.
I think we're going. We're going to have a cigar party.
Oh, very nice.
Cigars are bad for your health.
They
don't
are.
endorse that at all. But if you want to come hang out,
but they're good for your social life.
They are good for your social life.
I
only smoke them socially.
and work as a social activity.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to getting back to conferences and traveling again. I'm not looking forward to airports. Not looking forward to nights away and whatnot, but it will be good. What's the best thing you're looking forward to post-COVID?
Post-COVID, I'm going to relate directly to what you just said. Boom. So if you've heard of them, so it's a supersonic new startup, so that is trying to fly anyone for $100 or less anywhere in the world for about 4 hours. So, yeah. So by 2030. So it's quite a bit after, COVID, hopefully. But, to me, that's exciting. I hate all the long flights, have done way too many around the globe. And I'm excited to see startups like that, trying to achieve something that's game changing. And they are trying to do it carbon neutral, which would be very, very interesting.
I don't mind carbon neutral. I think that's very commendable. I would like sonic boom neutral. Like we sometimes when the airplanes fly over and we're outside, we're like, that's pretty loud.
Yeah.
If people want to engage you to speak at a conference, what's the best way for them to find you and ask you and get you involved?
So direct message on Twitter is good. So I'm at nohacken. So there's no G on the end of that. So it was a joke from long ago related to hacking up some crypto gear.
We're a little partial to the letter G, so
don't
just drop the G.
You had already taken that G. So. And I'm also on LinkedIn at William Tony Cole.
Because there's another Tony Cole out there.
There is.
And is he like deception?
No, well, he apparently has done some deceit because there's a shamed basketball star and a few others as well.
Well,
Yeah.
let's end on a better note than that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I was thought you were going to ask the last one about the cyber fiction of the technology potentially getting away from us.
What do you think of Westworld? Did you like that?
Yeah.
When I think of a simulation in science fiction about AI and just doing that ultimate form of deception, do you think the simulations you're running at Ativa are ever going to be like rivaling employees? And are you going to have like this Westworld situation where somebody inside of TiVo is like, if we could just browse a little bit better, we could probably entice some malware to come in here a little bit better, pretend it. No?
Not from our side. I'm not concerned about it. I am concerned about technology getting away from us, and I'm also even more concerned about technology advances being utilized against us by nefarious actors, not by other AI, and I think about, everybody wants autonomous vehicles, autonomous planes, autonomous, taxis that are in the air, and you think about, some of the structures, and anything that can be coded, we all know, can be hacked as well. I mean, there is no perfect code. It's humans writing it today. And what happens if somebody, holds you ransom, at 100 miles an hour, in an automated car going down the interstate, and you're going to pay up, or
Call Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock.
yeah,
Yes.
or we're gonna, yeah. I mean, it really is, that type of concept. So is that far fetched? Maybe a little bit, but if it can be coded, it can be hacked.
There's probably a thread we can do where we take all these old movies and make them cyber movies. So obviously you take Speed, you
Yeah.
replace it with a bomb, and you do it with a cyber thing. That would be interesting. I thought about recasting War Games with perhaps a female young black lead, just try to appeal more to a broader audience. I'm sure we can go on and on and on. I don't know, how would I redo Star Wars? Doesn't really matter. Tony, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me on the show. Really appreciate it.
Alrighty, this is Ron and Cyndi Gula, ending another episode of Gula Tech Cyber Fiction.